Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to this latest edition of Lemongrass Live. Need a bit of imagination on this one, so I want you to picture Ebenezer Scrooge poring over his latest hyperscaler invoice instead of a ledger. I'm Ian Graham, a principal in the advisory practice at Lemongrass, and a veteran who's watched IT budgets rise and fall for at least 25 years now.
Hi everyone, I'm Chris Beard, resident solutions architect here at Lemongrass. I spend my days in the trenches with customers, turning sticker shock into FinOps success stories. And I've got a few of those stories to share with you today as we go through the topics.
And hi everybody, I'm Rogan Morrison. I've spent many a year helping organizers understand their SAP licensing strategy to get the right posture from a licensing perspective. And as this has evolved over the last few years, the importance of FinOps in the context of SAP licensing is playing a much more important role. So we'll have a great discussion around how to get there today in the SAP licensing space.
Thank you very much, Rogan. Just to point out to everybody, we are live. We are a global team, so any slight glitches in audio quality and everything else, we do apologise for, but hopefully you will capture the gist of what we're talking about. So over the next 30 minutes, we're going to meet three spirits: FinOps past, present, and yet to come. And by the end of this, we'll leave you with some practical plays to run pretty much as soon as this video ends. Chris.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ian. So it's my privilege to talk to you about the ghost of FinOps past. Let me take you back to 2015. Enterprises were lifting SAP onto large VMs in the cloud, often hosting very large databases, some in 2015, even HANA in-memory databases, spending a lot of money on cloud infrastructure. Infrastructure, for the first time in an SAP world, is being managed as a subscription model rather than buying the tin and hosting it somewhere. And it is possible to overspend very easily. Day-to-day spend varies a lot more than in the past. But CFOs want predictability as well as the savings and flexibility that comes with the cloud. So AWS introduces reserved instances, promising up to a 72% saving for committing for a longer period of time to a specific machine or machine type. But SAP workloads, they're not volatile, they're structured, steady, strategic. That's important because we can buy cloud now for how SAP runs in the cloud. And so we reached the beginning of maturing FinOps using those RIs. Then 2019 rolls around, AWS now lets you commit to spend without locking into specific machine types, but instead families with savings plans. Suddenly, you can think in terms of environments, production, DR, project, N+1, and so on, instead of hardware or VMs, and flexibility allows you to come up a level in the thinking about your landscapes. 2020, Azure moves into a similar approach, follows suit. You're now spending over a range of flexible models, and GCP, of course, more recently has come in with even flexibility about when the expiry is of their committed use discounts. So those ways in which you can engineer savings against machine types in the cloud have evolved to become more flexible over time as the hyperscalers are sought to compete.
Excellent. So the plan would appear to be commit early to get the best deal, but you've got to retain that flexibility.
Exactly. When your workload goes live, of course, you want to right size. So one of the beauties of the cloud is that you don't need to know upfront exactly how much hardware you need. You can run your workload for a period of time, a few weeks, to see whether you got your sizing correct, move up or down to get it right, and then lock in order to get the best price. And that works really well for SAP. It's really been the sweet spot in running SAP on cloud infrastructure.
Marvelous.
So having talked you through the story of the structure of how the savings plans have worked, FinOps in the FinOps of the past, the ghost of FinOps past, has all been about looking at infrastructure spend and how you can optimize the saving on it, running variable workloads. Perhaps you've got a project workload that needs to scale up and down on demand, or you're right sizing, and then locking in savings for those other areas, and then measuring against budgets to ensure you're paying correctly. And that's matured over the years, so that cloud spend for SAP now, it tends to be extremely predictable and consistent, and is really a mature model in the FinOps discipline. But now what we should move to is well, maybe let me wrap up. Across all three clouds, direction is clear. Rigid SKUs are out, with strategic flexible commitments are in. For SAP, which is one of the more predictable workloads, it just makes it easy.
Excellent. And knowing what a lover you are of a war story, Chris. Have you got something that would kind of bring this to life with an actual happening?
Yeah, for sure. Let me talk to you about one of the fashion brands that we helped a few years ago. So we'd inherited their SAP environment, which had been migrated by a traditional partner that didn't have a cloud mindset. We were asked to look at a FinOps assessment and take over support of the system, identify ways of reducing the overall spend. We looked at their HANA systems, which were the wrong size. We reconfigured the way the SAP system was distributed, introduced operating schedules for those systems that remained on demand, like the sandbox and development systems, added reserved instances, and removed waste of unused storage that wasn't required anymore, and we reduced their cost down to 1/3 of what their spend was previously. And that is what we used to see, where FinOps hadn't been applied and cloud spend was just either out of control or not optimized. Savings of 1/2 to 2/3 were really typical. Now that, of course, everyone is running FinOps models who's running in the cloud, there are less savings to find. But even today, we're talking to a major hotel chain. We're looking at their backup volumes removal, now configured to go straight to S3 buckets. That will remove 53 terabytes of stage 1 storage and save them 30K a year. Another recommendation we're coming in is around moving the database backups from standard S3 storage to infrequent access, the colder storage option with the tiering. That'll increase the cost per resource, but the cost saving of the number of daily backups will outweigh the increased restore costs as they're infrequently required. So you're making trade-offs now rather than it just being a clean-cut decision. That's going to save them over 80K a year. So there are still savings to be found. They're more nuanced, they're more technically adept. It requires deeper understanding of the products and the models that the hyperscalers, especially the new stuff the hyperscalers are coming out with, like the CUD extensions from GCP, but there are still savings to be found.
Great stuff. Thanks, Chris. Goes to Christmas past, covered. Some bits a bit scary, lots of opportunity in there. Onto the Ghost of FinOps present. Rogan, can you walk us through that, where we are today?
Yeah, absolutely, and thanks for that, and also the background that you've given there. I think today in the FinOps space, what has significantly changed is around the FinOps with the concept that SAP have taken on pushing clients to cloud. And within that context, there's a definite move from a licensing perspective to take consideration of your SAP licensing in the overall context of your FinOps space of what you're trying to deal with. So the first area that customers that we see is that they need to start understanding what are the objectives in order to achieve a greater FinOps strategy. And some of these objectives include assessing and optimizing the total cost of ownership across not only the license landscape, but as you've already indicated, Chris, around the infrastructure side. That's normally covered, but most of the licensing elements are not really covered in an integrated way from a FinOps perspective. So that's kind of the first thing that what we see from customers in terms of their ask. The second part of that is that they want to move into a more traditional software asset management style of managing the assets that they're procuring from a licensing perspective, and to be able to do that with an increased amount of what they call SAM maturity. So this has been around for quite a while, but within the SAP space, it's not necessarily as great as we see in other industries from a maturity perspective. I think the third thing that yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Sorry, Rogan, I just wanted to check in and make sure we're all on the same page. So with the Ghost of FinOps Past, we were really talking about infrastructure spend and managing infrastructure as a subscription. And then with the Ghost of FinOps Present, as I understand it, it's not only infrastructure, but now you're layering licenses on top because of the SAP private cloud model, RISE as it used to be known. And more than that, right? The infrastructure and the licenses now affect one another. They're linked together. So you increase your infrastructure, it changes your licenses. You increase your licenses, it changes your infrastructure costs. Is that right?
Absolutely, Chris. I mean, the link between used equivalents and your infrastructure is now combined in your contract. So you need to be aware of that. I'll talk a little bit later around some of the other changes that have been specifically affected with regards to cloud licensing and the way in which the license model has changed. And that's in kind of another point coming down on this idea of why customers are and what they're trying to achieve in terms of specific objectives. But 100%, Chris, you're right. This is This is the change that has been forced upon customers due to the way in which SAP is now contracting with them and the contract model that they've actually defined for customers. And on top of this, customers, in terms of this new contract model, need to go about changing their procurement policy and the way in which they negotiate their SAP license contracts. In the past, they were able to negotiate with hyperscaler vendors separately. Now they need to include that negotiation, and it's only with one partner, that's the SAP. So that they've got to readjust their strategy in order to get the best out of not only their license constructs, but also the infrastructure constructs with SAP. So being in what we call it RISE or Cloud ERP Private Edition, all of this is now bundled together. And they need to be able to, and again, a big change around this is to be able to manage this based on a consumption model where software is procured as a service, or SaaS as a service, software as a service, rather than just having procured a maintenance on a yearly basis. And why is this so important? Because, as you rightly said, Chris, in the past, customers bought the software licenses on-prem. These would be paid upfront with a 22% maintenance payment every year. This is no longer the current case with customers. They now have moved to the subscription model, which is based on a monthly set of metrics. And as you scale up and down, you need to be much more accurate in reporting based on what you're consuming from a license perspective, because this is no longer just paid for once off on a yearly basis, but now on a monthly basis. On top of that, what we're also seeing is that the complexity and the compliance has changed as well. So SAP used to run yearly audits. Now SAP is running solutions, and you can find it in BTP on FinOps. They're running the SAP for Me solutions to help customers make sure that they're compliant on a monthly basis or an all the time basis. And why do customers need to get involved in this? Because, well, in the past, they don't, as they don't now, they don't want to get any nasty surprises in terms of a license true-up. So FinOps becomes significantly more relevant in the license context. What is more to this, and what adds another layer of complexity, is that when you look at it from a customer-centric perspective, they've procured all of these licenses. Now, in many global organizations, they also need to split up the costs either between division or between different departments or regional areas. So once you've procured the licenses, you need to go and say, okay, so how much is each department going to pay? And in many cases, in the past, it used to be the global budget, and everybody used to try and get away with not paying as much if you were in a specific department. So there was a great amount of pushback to financial departments to say, hey, we don't think we used much of that license. But now you have to be very clear in terms of what license are you using on a monthly basis. Again, it comes back to that granularity side. So these are some of the key objectives that customers are trying to achieve when they're moving to this new model. So quite a few things that have changed for customers, as I mentioned, and this is something that's totally new for many organizations as they move in this journey from an SAP perspective, from ECC on-prem licenses to the new cloud-based licensing model that SAP is putting out.
Let me jump in with some questions there, Rogan. So we talked about the contract. So when you're moving into the RISE model or the private cloud model, and I think with the FinOps past, if you didn't have a FinOps model before you went to the cloud, you ended up having spikes of unexpected on-demand, uncontrolled spend, and you ended up spending a whole heap of money you didn't expect to that way. I think what I understood now is when you're moving to the cloud with RISE, or you're moving to SAP private cloud, what you really want to do is get that enhanced FinOps licensing perspective before you're signing the contract with SAP, because that's where you could define an awful lot of the value. Is that a correct understanding, that really this is a prerequisite to going into that commercial construct?
Absolutely. So one of the things, as you said, Chris, is to get yourself prepared for change. And customers have asked, like, well, so how do we get prepared? Because if you're not prepared or you're not planned, then at the end of the day, something incorrect could happen from a payment perspective. So you end up, a year into your new contract being under licensed, and then you've got to, do a massive true up. We've seen examples of customers who haven't actually got the right sizing from an FUE model perspective, and then they end up getting a true up from SAP halfway during the first or the second year of their actual contract model, and then they're stuck in a really challenging situation. So if you don't prepare to be successful with a FinOps model at the beginning of the contract, you can most likely expect some challenges during the second, third year, or even longer if you've signed a longer agreement with SAP. So this is really important for customers to get to. And I think what's important is putting in place the right building blocks. So most customers haven't, over years, they've bought multiple different orders of SAP, and they were very structured in place. But now you've got to get into the principle of buying almost on demand SAP. So the contract management side of your purchasing, of your procurement of SAP licensing is totally different. So you can now go online in certain instances and automatically upscale additional license values in the BTP world, in the SAP space, etc. So there's multiple quick and easy ways to do this, but that means that you need to have a better handle on all the contracts that you actually now put in place. On top of that, you need to have in place a better understanding of all the metrics that run across this. Why do I say this is important? Because if you look at the evolving nature of SAP's landscape, way back in the early 20s, 2005, 2006, we had the MySAP.com era, and most of the licensing construct users enabled the customer to do most of the functions. What SAP have been doing over time is splitting those out, and now you have multiple user licenses covering multiple different spaces in terms of functionality and technology in that which they're selling. So are there duplications? Potentially. You have to look across these and say, am I paying for a specific user license that has already been considered for additional functionality in another area? A good example of this is specifically between your current ERP solution and BTP. There seems to be a bit of gray areas around certain of the usage categories in that space. When you think of developers doing development on your standard ABAP stack, now you've got developers also sitting in the SAP build stack. You need to understand which of those licenses you need at this point in time, because in the past, it was all sitting on your ERP stack. Now it's been shifted into this context. So this is some of the challenges that most organizations face. We put in place building blocks to get there. I've spoken about contract management, the license management across the different areas. I mentioned some examples in terms of users, but you also need to understand what's happening in the engines. The engine metrics are changing. So let me give you a good example of this. What you once used to procure from a license management perspective, let's say on global trade services, was measured based on users. It's now measured based on spend or revenue. So very important for customers to understand the change in the metric and how that impacts them from a total cost of ownership perspective. We're talking about financial operations here, and therefore it's vital to understand how those measures are being put in place and all the metrics that SAP are using for those. That means the detail behind the metric. In other words, what's the definition? I think the fourth thing that customers need within the context of licensing is understanding their digital access. In the past, SAP had and they still do have a much more wall-to-wall approach. They would like you to buy everything in the SAP space, which is great if you are very SAP-centric.
SAP Business Suite, right? It's making a comeback, that retro phrase.
Absolutely, the Business Suite comeback, and the way in which SAP have gone out and taken on specific products which supplement their ERP core. So SAP have been strategic in their nature, in a very specific way, taking on things like SuccessFactors, Qualtrics, etc. over time to add in products where they see they have a deficiency. And for them to go out and develop that product would have taken a long time, so they've gone out on the acquisition trail. That makes sense, but some customers don't always have a wall-to-wall centricity for SAP. So that means they want to have more of a best-of-breed approach. So therefore, digital access and the way in which you are indirectly accessing SAP from third parties is very important. And lots of customers, again, from a total cost of ownership, might not get the best outcome. So the digital access side needs evaluation. It needs to constantly go into FinOps space every time you make a strategic decision to procure something outside of SAP's product suite, that business suite, and you decide to link that specific application into your SAP core, there is a potential that digital access can occur. And that's part of FinOps management. So understanding what these building blocks are. And then, Chris, you mentioned it so specifically, like infrastructure. We see that you have this great amount of maturity in the infrastructure space in terms of FinOps. Technical architects like yourself, Chris, have been working on this for a much longer period of time, but the alignment, as you mentioned, this alignment between licensing and the infrastructure was not there in the past. So customers need to understand that. And then there's one last area that we see as critical, and there's a new change, and maybe you guys can guess what that is. It starts with a big D, and SAP have been banging this drum for the last few weeks around how customers are moving in a specific area. So Chris, Graham, maybe you can think of one last building block that you think customers should have from a data or from a business perspective, and you can give me an idea.
Well, if you're going to say business and data, you could be speaking about business data cloud, probably, right? I mean, this has been the big buzz. But before we get there, I had a couple of questions I wanted to ask Rogan, if it's all right, about the stuff you'd already covered. So I know some of my customers, the large customers we typically work with, which tends to be the profile of customers we have generally, have teams who are looking at their contracts, looking at their licensing and optimizing over time. But the change here, the reason this is now integrated into FinOps is it's not an activity you're doing semi-regularly or when you come up for an audit or when you're buying stuff, but now it's every month you're doing a true up with SAP, and the scope of it is much wider, right? You're not just thinking about your core SAP licenses, you're now looking in BTP, Business Transformation Platform, you're looking in BDC, which again has got a different licensing construct, and the overlaps and nuances between them. So the discipline has changed. It's more frequent, it's got specific nuances to it that weren't there before, and it now needs to be considered as part of the FinOps discipline because, not only because of the interaction between infrastructure and licensing, but also because the licensing and contract model is now different and measured differently. Did I get that right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great summary that you've done there, Chris. And as you mentioned, the last one is this data usage. How do customers make best sense of the business data center, BDC stuff that SAP have just put out? But in line with that, what are the other tooling that they're using from potentially Snowflake or Databricks? It could be a Azure data lake that they were running on, etc. So multiple other areas need to be considered in this greater FinOps model. And you're 100% right. Customers now need to take things on a monthly basis rather than on a yearly basis. So there's a greater deal of granularity that needs to be built into data, FinOps, data dashboards, etc. So that's where we are at this point in time, and we see a greater need for this.
So there's an awful lot of complexity in there, a lot of new concepts for people. Let's break this down into a simple, practical approach. How should customers be thinking about this?
So yeah, you're right, because there is an approach. There are about 4 main steps to follow when we're thinking about an approach. The first thing is just pure analysis. So where's the company at? Do they have any FinOps practices in place? So in some cases, again, it talks about a maturity type element. So some of the companies that we've worked with and we've been doing assessments at or analysis at, they're at a maturity level 0. They haven't even started with this type of view of FinOps. Some are a bit further down the line, and they've got certain FinOps practices in place specifically around infrastructure. So we can build off that and get that in place. The second part is you need to have automation, and Lemongrass is all about automating things and automating processes to make it simpler, better, faster. So if you don't or are not using licensing management tools, then you will certainly struggle. Certain things from a licensing perspective cannot just be analyzed using a manual-based approach. As an example, users and the usage of the solutions that SAP bring out. There are over 176,000 transactions. To go and analyze what the users are doing in each of those transactions in order to bring it back to the relevant authorization usage is impossible if you try to do this manually. It's almost too broad a set of scope. So tooling helps here, and that helps automate the process. On top of that, you can do things from a dashboarding perspective, and it makes it much, much easier to see what your consumption is on a monthly basis. And then scaling. For most organizations, they want to get this at a global level, but we suggest to most organizations, start small. Take a small slice of the pie, get this accurate, and then scale this and build this out for the rest of the organization. Otherwise, you end up with a lot of potential different dashboards, but they're not really meeting the organization's requirements. And then I think the last thing that we suggest to customers in terms of an approach that really works is industrialize the model, ensure it meets all the targets that you have from both a localized or divisional perspective and a global perspective in terms of consumption. As an example, BTP. You can structure your BTP structure for different layers within the organization. So you can have sub-accounts, you can have global accounts. You need to understand how those all fit together from a top-down perspective, but also from a localized or from a sub-accounting perspective. And this is where it's really important to build a FinOps model correctly from a structured approach perspective.
Thanks so much, Rogan. That's super cool as a way that customers can practically approach the problem.
Yeah. So
again, go for it, Ian.
I was just going to say, the way to do that again, I would layer on top of that unless this is something you do every day of the week, you have specialist organisations such as Lemongrass out there who this is our core business, is to lead customers down that path. So rather than facing quite a daunting project ahead of you, by bringing the specialists in early, giving that advice early is usually a prime recommendation, whether it be Lemongrass or an alternate. But getting your specialist advice in ahead is always a good plan.
Yeah, and you're 100% right. We've developed models to help organizations put in place a valid and a very effective and a very robust and rigorous FinOps process. We work with our leading organizations from a tooling perspective to help that make this successful. And we have a good approach and a good methodology to help organizations ensure a successful outcome when they are looking from a FinOps perspective. Normally that starts when we start reviewing their S4HANA and we build out the initial license assessment. We do the details behind what customers are going to be consuming, and that then naturally and should organically flow into a FinOps model. That makes most sense. And within that flow, then we have a set of 6 steps roughly that translate the outcomes of that into a usable, functional FinOps model that organizations can continuously expand upon as their application and infrastructure landscape changes. And that's really important because customers are, as you already said, Chris, they're spinning up things in the infrastructure space. Will this impact the full user equivalence model? Potentially. Will it impact their data model? Absolutely, most likely. Will it impact their BTP usage? There's potential for that. So as you make changes within each of the different layering structures that you have from an architecture perspective, then you get to see the implications of those changes from a financial operations perspective, which is really the benefit of having a good FinOps systems in place. And that requires customers to go down a step-by-step pathway, which we have defined, and to ensure that there's ongoing change management. I think that's one of the most critical elements that customers forget about, is that they need to educate and re-educate their business organization to understand the implications around how changes in landscape, changes in applications, changes in requirements tie back to the licensing constructs that they've actually had and the contracts that they sign with an SAP value-added reseller or with SAP directly, because this is changing on an ongoing basis now and is not so static as it was in the past.
I think that's a really great point, Regan, and it puts me in mind of an example that a customer I was talking to the other day was talking about the outcome they'd had from their FinOps review before they'd engaged with SAP on the contract. Like we were talking about, Ian, bringing in your experts early. What they were telling me is that when they'd done the views, and they weren't clear which path they were going down, whether they were going on the old native route or whether they were going for RISE or they were doing something else. In the end, they chose RISE customer data center option. But they ended up buying a whole bunch of extra SAP services, so more than was in the initial contract. But because they'd done the proper licensing assessment and trued up what their users were actually doing, the license type they'd assigned to, you were talking about converting accurately to the FUE model, Rogan, they saved 2 million overall. So they're getting more value. They're certain about the route they're taking. They know where they're going, and they saved $2 million. Like, and that was many multiples of how much they spent on the advice and getting their FinOps running and being able to bake some of that in-house as well. So for us, it wasn't an ongoing service. They built that capability so they can continue with that change management and that FinOps themselves going forward. But by doing it at the start and doing it right, they got a much better outcome than they would have done otherwise. So yeah, this can really be a fantastic ROI, just like FinOps, the Ghost of FinOps past was before in terms of ROI. The building in the licensing, the contract considerations, and understanding the way the new world works from a FinOps perspective has huge value to customers. Or if you look at it the other way, a lot of pain if you don't do it up front, you get caught out.
Lovely. Thanks for another leaf out of your memoirs, Chris. Always appreciated. Just conscious of time, so we are going to move into the future now. So the Ghost of FinOps yet to come. So if we sprint forward to 2029, S4 HANA Cloud Public Edition is now the norm. No root login, quarterly auto upgrades, no access to infra metrics. FinOps now climbs higher up the stack.
Brilliant. Thanks for setting the scene, Ian. This future where we're all on S4 HANA, we've got clean cores, we're all consuming SAP Public Cloud. It's all met SAP's strategic roadmap. We pivot from optimizing VMs to optimizing outcomes. That's how we see it going. I mean, guessing the future is always a little bit dangerous, but I'm going to be brave and have a go at how we as Lemongrass see what the future might look like in that kind of space that we've set out as a hypothetical. So as we head SaaS first, truly SaaS first, public cloud now, leave a shift. We're not tweaking instances anymore. We're influencing outcomes. There are 5 things we expect to see as trends. So one is shadow metering agents. So in BTP sidecars, now all of our customization and innovation has moved outside of the clean core, and the customer specific innovation is now in BTP. You're now consuming that on demand and you're tracking in the BTP space rather than in your core ERP, and you're doing that by looking at the number of FI postings or actual functional events. The way that BTP is metered is different from how we've been thinking about infrastructure to run our businesses in the past. And that might go wider than the SAP ecosystem, and there may be other tools that you're using or consuming from the BTP platform that also need to be considered with their own metrics. So it changes the way you're measuring things and making sure that you're getting ROI from your spend. Another area we see is predictive licensing tools. So the world of AI, and I know some people are skeptical, but here at Lemongrass, our view is that the AI will never get dumber than it is today. It's probably going to get a lot better going forward. And AI is already delivering great value into predictive models. So making sure you've got stock in the right place at the right time, planning going forward with modeling and so on. And we see that definitely helping in the FinOps space in 2 areas. One is to look at the probable future demand based on the information you give it about what the company strategically expects to do and the wider socioeconomic and geopolitical context, but also helping with internal politics. So we spoke earlier about the bun fight over who's going to pay for stuff, and that cost accounting and the tagging of different spend to different outcomes is going to be more reliant on AI to be able to develop that budget true up at the end of the month and take a lot less company time and management effort. Then FinOps framework scopes. So we think about SAP selling products today, but in the future we expect it to be value. So I want this outcome. I want to, be able to run my invoices with 20% less staff, and that will be what you buy, and you'll get the outcome, and what sits behind it is just the plumbing. Like today, you want to be able to run an SAP product, you don't think about the infrastructure you're buying. Similarly, we expect the purchasing to move up the stack to value outcomes rather than buying a product to achieve them. We expect things to become more democratized in the way that you're buying things. So where customers have leftover, today they have shelfware, right, and they don't use it, and you can't resell that to someone else. Although, with divestments and stuff, there's other rules. We expect that to become much more open, so that you can buy things from other companies, and there becomes a marketplace for reselling value that you're not taking from your contracts with SAP and other vendors. And then, of course, sustainability. So as we all know, the world is getting a bit warmer, and carbon credits has become a thing. FinOps today mostly looks at finance. Some companies that are leading are also looking at sustainability, and I think this will become a much more increasing trend as we go towards net zero. And we'll see that FinOps is measuring carbon expenditure as well as money. Yeah, so that's 5 trends we see for the future, Ian.
Great stuff. So it sounds like the shift from buying infra cheaper to using SaaS much smarter, data tiering, redesign, AI-driven shaping. So yeah, luckily for Lemongrass, we're already doing this. Certainly willing to have a chat with any of our customers about that. So all looking good. I believe you've got a couple of FAQs to go through here, Chris. Are you or Chris and Rogan, do you want to?
Yeah. Let me take this first one. So will SAP expose cost APIs in the public cloud? So we think no, probably not anytime soon. So shifting to value metrics probably makes sense.
Excellent. Rogan, I think there's one there for you as well. It says, can I negotiate usage buffers?
Yeah, you can, absolutely. I think in the future, contracts with customers will certainly include usage buffers, both in terms of ranges to scale up and to scale down. Again, we're talking about services and models around this, so definitely we see in the future that customers are becoming a lot smarter in the way in which they are writing terms and conditions into their contract files to bring things both up and down.
I'm getting a nudge. We're over time, guys. So let's wrap up. So in the past, Ghost of FinOps past taught us to manage commitments like a bond portfolio. Present as demands us living cost models, considering a wider scope, and also contract licensing on a more frequent basis. And the future will all be about value and how we track that value and move up that chain and take advantage of some of the newer tooling.
Good stuff. Yeah, as you can see in front of you, there's a QR code on the screen. If you've experienced any audio issues, we do apologize. I promise you on a one-on-one or a Teams call that we put in place, the audio quality will be much better. But there's a lot for us to go through today, so feel free to reach out. We'd love to have a conversation. If you want to book in for a FinOps maturity sprint, we're more than happy to do that. But primarily, we've been through this several times before. If you're staring down the wrong end of it at the moment, give us a call. We'll give you the gotchas. We'll give you the help that you need. Thank you all for joining. Have a great rest of your day.
Have a great rest of the day, everyone.
Thanks, Steve.
Bye for now.